Welcome to the Sports Nutrition Australia Roundtable. We've got Joey Cantlin at Joey Cantlin PT. I am at the Australian Sports Nutritionist. We've got Kyle Webber at the Physique Coach, Brandon Kempter at Brandon Kempter, Eric Helms at Helms3DMJ on Instagram. On the gram, yeah. And then he's got many other things as well. He's got a lot of followers on YouTube as well.
Most of them are paid for and bought. I have actually about 10 organic followers.
Just like everyone else in Australia.
Including you guys, that's my 10. So.
4 of 10.
Yeah.
So we've got a lot of stuff that we want to rip into today, but I guess one of the things, it's pretty cool. So just for me to provide some context for yourself and for those who will be watching / listening, we've got 3 of the most successful natural federation coaches in Australia in the last 2 years, really. So Brandon's sort of like your figure, bodybuilding. Kyle, sort of pretty much a lot of categories, whatever. And then Joey was up until recently, like, you know, female fitness, female bikini, male fitness physique, and then he stepped into the bodybuilding and just smashed that recently as well. I showed you the photo of him and that guy. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
just
so
stupid.
Yeah.
Everyone kept asking me, like, how do you get his quads like that? I'm like, your guess is as good as mine. He rocked up one day and I just said, oh shit.
You're like, I didn't choose his parents.
Yeah. So, when he's squatting 240 for 8 in his like lowest calorie weeks, that's for sets, you know that he's probably going to be pretty good.
How much do you bench? I don't bench anymore. I'm pretty weak. Probably like maybe 180. I was like, what, for one? No, for about 6.
I'm not a powerlifter.
Yeah, you're
for
a
reps,
sick.
bro. Yeah.
So some of the, I guess, hotly contended topics that are coming up, like within Australia again, is this the whole debate on should they reverse diet, and if they reverse diet, what should it look like, or should it be a recovery diet, and you know, specifically for physique competitors and whatnot.
Right.
I have a position on it based on, you know, looking at evidence and presenting sort of what I would call best practice and stuff. Mine being get shit up as quickly as possible, and,
right.
You know, measure resting metabolic rate and calorie expenditure, and know that you're just not going to spill over, you know, after they've competed and stuff. But that's sort of the clinician in me.
Yeah.
As someone who's a coach who specialises in that more, like the people I work with are performance athletes, so not physique athletes at all. Someone who works with physique and performance.
Yep.
Where are you at? And you're on the forefront of the research as well.
Yeah, I'm actually really fortunate that I've gotten to hook up with some folks over at Bill Campbell's lab. They're doing some of the only research on physique competitors out there, and they're actually looking at this at the moment. So we'll have data coming out soon, but we do have a lot of data that's not specifically intervention-based stuff, like an RCT, where we're comparing 2 things of just looking at what is the root cause of the adaptations we see. That I think we're becoming more and more obvious is basically just an extended state of having low energy availability. And then how do you fix that? And then how does body composition come into play there? And it does seem there's some interaction. And then also, what's the psychological side of it? Because we know that being in a calorie-restricted state and getting very, very lean also drives biologically some of the things that we would identify as disordered eating. So it's something serious. And I do want to say that I've annoyed some other people by making it almost like saying, hey, it's A or B, recovery diet or reverse diet. They're different. Reverse diet's bad and recovery diet's good. And I'm going to acknowledge that publicly because it's important. The reason why we're drawing that line in the sand is because terminology matters, words matter. And the idea of a reverse diet makes it sound like you're literally just doing the exact opposite thing that you came out. And the emphasis is on building calories, having higher numbers. The emphasis is on staying lean. It's more of the connotation and the belief around it. I think the way it was originally presented, regardless of the speed and the actual numbers, was very much driven around, I want to cater to the fact that you want to be lean, but you also want to eat a lot of food. And that's not necessarily the goal of, it shouldn't be the goal of any physique competitor, right? Being shredded is, we know it's not a conducive place to building muscle. We have plenty of data to support that. The only reason you want veins in your glutes is if you're getting on stage, right? So emphasizing the word recovery is really important because it states, hey, we know a lot now about the stress that you undergo to get on stage, male or female, and it is important that you recover, not just staying in the diet mindset, but eating more and trying to stay really lean. And I think that can exacerbate, and it feeds into a lot of the disordered eating that is very common among competitors. So that's the first thing I want to say. The second thing I want to say is that there's as many iterations of the reverse diet as there are iterations of diets. And I've seen some that are basically the recovery diet. But anyway, Jeff Alberts coined the term recovery diet because we were just so sick of tired of seeing competitors harming themselves, or talking a coach into harming them, or being harmed by a coach, and trying to meet a standard of nutrition post-competition that is unrealistic psychologically and doesn't actually get the job done the best way physiologically. And that, the worst version of it is that you're staying in a deficit. You're adding something like 100 calories per week, 50 calories a week, dropping one cardio a week off until you get into a surplus. Basically, you're eating up into a show after your show is kind of what the worst version of a reverse diet is. And that keeps someone underfed, and there's no reason to be in a deficit when you're not dieting. So I think the one non-negotiable is that when the show's over, you're out of a deficit. And the size of the surplus, and I'm sorry, the end of a season, I should say, not just simply a show. And the size of that surplus should very much be dependent upon when you're going to be competing next. So at least in the States, what will often happen is you'll get a pro card. You would plan to end the season, but now within a year or 2 years, depending on the organization,
You have to compete again.
you have to compete again.
Push that, I know that
Yeah.
a lot of
Or it just makes sense to do so.
Done really well.
Like you want to have a long off season to compete in the pros, and you don't actually want to, like, maybe you could wait 2 years, but one off season is not enough for you to be like, yeah, I'll go up against Brian Whitaker, so you decide that, what, I'm just going to compete this year. I'm going to take 6 weeks off the diet and then drop back down, get on stage, get my shit pushed in by all the pros, but at least I'll then have my pro status. And at that point, then if you go 3 years, you can just pay for an extra year to stay registered. So I think there are times when it would make sense to take a much more moderate approach with it, stay relatively lean, because you've got to diet down again. But in general, I don't recommend competing more than every other year. And if you've got a full 18 months before you need to start your diet again, or roughly around there, it makes a lot of sense to get around 10% over stage weight, 15% over stage weight at least. And I think that's to do so in an effective way, you want to have a semi-aggressive surplus. I think the surplus you should be in should probably be the highest surplus you have at any point in your season. And then once you've achieved the point when you're 5 to 10% over, and these are just rough guidelines, that's when you can slow things down and start looking at trying to gain 1% of your body weight per month if you're drug free. So that makes the most sense physiologically if we know what drives low energy availability. It's just not eating enough, really. And we know that it seems to be exacerbated by body comp. That's an area where we need more research, because right now all of the research indicates that it is what you do to become lean that causes issues, not being lean itself. But man, does anyone think, like I tell you what, we've all had competitors. A 500 calorie 500 calorie deficit when you're 6% body fat for a guy feels totally different than when you're 16% body fat.
And especially the implications of getting to that set point and staying there and holding it there for an extended period of time. Some people try to hold that for 12, 18 months.
I think you've got a problem when you are 16% body fat and you do feel shit. That's when there's an issue. But I find people at the end of prep, they're like, oh, my coach has wrecked me. I'm like, dude, you're shredded. You're supposed to have low libido, you're supposed to feel rubbish. And like you said, it doesn't really, it doesn't matter, but it's not the approach that makes you feel rubbish, it's your body fat, which is what I've spoken about a lot with people.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have, we've got a handful of case studies. Case studies are, they're weak data if we want to make generalizations, but they're really useful to let us know kind of what to expect from a clinical perspective. So, we have some case studies, and I know the people in the case study, I've seen them on stage, and you were shredded. And you have a very reasonable energy availability if you look at it. The cardio's not crazy. Your macros are set up well. Your training program's decent. Everyone objectively would go, yeah, that's a solid, that meets what we think is best practice.
Yeah.
And then you go, oh, and you had 7 times the normal stress levels on a questionnaire.
Yeah.
So maybe that's just kind of, it comes with the territory to some degree. Obviously, there are individual differences, but yeah, I think it's a crazy sport. You do everything right, and you're still going to feel pretty shitty at times.
Yeah.
Lane Norton actually said something very interesting as well at the last seminar that he did in Australia. And he said, I had this guy, he was talking about reverse dieting, and as we all know, Lane's very passionate about reverse dieting, at least was. He said, I did have one thing though where a guy reverse dieted perfectly, and his calories were up by like 700 or 800 after the show, and he was still very lean. And even though he was eating so much, he still felt like absolute dog shit.
Yeah.
He's like, I can't perform in the gym, I feel rubbish,
You know, body fat's active tissue.
Yeah.
You know, it signals leptin. It has an impact. It's endocrinologically active. It's not just inert tissue. So I think, yeah, when we have primarily a lot of research looking at people moving from athletic to normal body compositions, it probably is the time spent in a deficit and the size of the deficit, and then the psychological stress. But I have to think when we start looking at people who are going from athletically lean to crazy lean, that's going to be some kind of modifying factor.
Yeah.
And is there any info on set points? Because I know that it's such a hotly hypothesized topic, and it's something that always interests me. So, like, if we look at the context and nuances around what we're just discussing, like if you're coming from a set point that's here to end at that point, the severity of what you may be experiencing subjectively could be a lot worse versus, say, athletically lean is 12% and they're getting to 7%. It may not even feel as bad, potentially as well.
So the set point concept is a model, and then there's been maybe 2, 3, 4 times that someone has created a theoretical model of how it is that we maintain our body weight, whether it's we're regulating energy expenditure, energy intake, body fat percentage, and whether it's primarily regulated by metabolic adaptation, quote unquote, or hunger and the interaction between the two. And we've got some models that replicate what we see in real life. And I think probably a settling point theory is the one that kind of respects the fact that if we truly had just straight up set points that were really good, we wouldn't have an obesity epidemic, right? That essentially you have to remember that a model can be useful, but all models are wrong because they're models. They're not real life.
Yeah.
And there's multiple overlapping feedback loops that go on in the body that dictate how we're going to regulate things. And I have a feeling that energy expenditure, energy intake, and body comp all come into play to some degree. So I think speaking to the fact that we just don't know really how it works, but the utility of the model is that you can adapt your behavior a lot, you can set up a lot of habits, and then there's also seems to be individuality in terms of there's a certain point where you just don't feel right. You finish a meal and there's a long delay before you actually feel a little full, and you're very food focused. And even when you're eating a lot and you're lean, you just feel lethargic, despite everything. Shouldn't be that way. And you're waiting on the next meal. That's kind of a large part of your life. And that's really not a great place to be if you're an athlete, which is what you look more like in the off season than the in season. The in season, it's kind of like I'm trying to do athletic things while surviving. The off season, it's time to hit some numbers, build some volume, make yourself protected against the stresses you got to put yourself through, so that next time you get on stage you look better. And I think you just have to think like staying lean in the off season is only conducive to the point that it's conducive. Yeah, it'll make the prep a little easier, but only to a point. And there's this kind of this sweet spot where starting lean enough, but also feeling great and healthy and not coming into a diet already having diet fatigue, And I think that point does change over time as your habits change. Like I'll use myself as a mini case study here. I did a couple mini cuts in 2018. I got down to hanging around 88, 89, which is a solid 5 kilos leaner than I've ever felt the way I felt. And I don't think my epigenetics turned on or anything like that, or I got out of America and now I'm not using like aluminum in my it's honestly, it's just that I had another 7 years of developing habits and making decisions and just having things be automated, to where the psychological stress of being relatively lean was coming at a lower point at a later point. So, but man, I used to start preps at 197, and have to get all the way down to the same weight because, or similar, right? Because, and that was a lot harder. So this has been easier doing this, but it's certainly, your settling point changes, I guess is the point I'm making, based on the habits you develop. But it doesn't, you still have biology, right? It's not like one day you're going to be like, yeah, I'm a kilo over stage weight all the time.
Yeah.
Just got to nail those habits. Yeah.
I think that's so important, like specifically from that psychological standpoint, because I know, like we spoke about a little bit yesterday, with how your prep for this show is so intuitive to an extent.
Yeah.
And I'll get asked a lot, I'm sure you guys will too, of how you can just walk around looking decent all the time without worrying about it. And I think what you just mentioned there about being able to build those habits over that 7-year period is way more conducive to staying lean, as opposed to tracking everything meticulously over that 7-year period.
Absolutely.
Because it will end up building that psychological awareness of, these are the practices that I'm trying to follow. I'm doing it because it's going to give me a set end result, but I'm not obsessing over the time frame. And that pulls back that level of self-control that a lot of people take way too far, and just delve into developing something that is going to habitually end up way worse of a scenario for them post-competition.
Yeah, it's basically all about biofeedback.
Yeah.
So tracking can become something that you get habituated doing. You just track every day and don't think about it. That happens a couple months into prep, right? You're just doing it. It's part of your life. You've accounted for it, but it's still an active thing you are doing. And it changes a little bit every day, the food choices, the availability. But if you just have a way of living and eating, that doesn't require a decision. It's not active in the same way. And if you take that and then put it on the back end of having years of tracking and having knowledge, kind of like I do, and any experienced competitor, so I'm not recommending this to novices, I can't not know roughly where my calories are, protein, carbs, and fat are. So I am aware of where my numbers are, and I can think about the internal cues, hunger, satiety, lethargy, libido, sleep quality, all the stuff that I'm aware of, and now I know how they relate to the numbers that I can't not be aware of, yet I'm not making decisions in the same way that I am when I have to track every day.
Yeah.
So I am experiencing a lot less diet fatigue in this process. I think, here's where I need to be. Here's what it feels like to be this lean. Here's how it was last time on these amount of calories. My weight loss is going at this amount. So I'm taking quantitative data and matching it against my experiences of qualitative experience of contest prep. Also looking at myself and getting some feedback from Berto so I can stay objective, or a little more objective. And then using that to drive my decisions and still being aware. I think that's a big piece. Before we got on air, Brandon was mentioning, hey, if you're not measuring something, how can you manage it? And I think the key piece here is that I'm not ignorant or unaware. I'm just not actively tracking it. And that's important. Yeah. So don't think that
it's that 80-20, it's just that 20% extra that's the critical mass point.
Yeah, it's like someone randomly, I participated in a study back in 2015 for one of my master's students who was looking at a ketogenic diet or near ketogenic diet on weightlifters and powerlifters.
It's an AUT.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we had to go through a tracking period, and I was like, I haven't done this in a while. And my friend had a piece of kumara, so like a sweet potato, right? And he was like, how much do you think this weighs? And I was like, I'm gonna guess like 60, 65 grams. And it was 63.
Yeah.
So
it shows.
So that skill set's still there.
You just know it, yeah.
Yeah, and like of course I still weigh portion sizes. Like I put yogurt in my shake every morning because it's what I do. I don't track the yogurt, but I put 200 grams because I'm trying to roughly get to a target. Yeah. So it's not as though I'm not weighing or managing things or being precise. It's just that I'm also using qualitative feedback, and I don't feel the need to whip out my MyFitnessPal and track it. And that is one less thing that I have to decide to do, one less thing that I'm stressed about. And I also don't have some of those OCD tendencies of putting these three numbers on a pedestal when my energy expenditure varies by 300 calories a day.
Yeah.
That's always my argument. I know that's where you and I will differ a lot, where Brandon's so analytical and I'm so, I got abs, I can just wing it. It's all good.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh my God, Kyle, how can you keep that shape? I'm like, I don't know, just eat something.
Yeah.
For me, I've come from that place, and you get to a point where you can just intuitively go, I know what that is. I don't need to track it. I'm still very aware of it. And that language that you were talking about before is so impactful psychologically, going, I know where I need to be, this is where I'm at, as opposed to what we see in a lot of novice competitors of, this is the situation, why am I not there?
Yeah.
And going, here's where I currently am. They would go, I'm not there. Why not? What can I change? What can I do? How do I fix it? And
right.
I would assume, if you're not at a point where you need to be, you go, I'm not there. Let's do this.
Yes. It's outcome driven. That's another part of the feedback loop, right? So if the goal of my refeed is to not look flat and to perform a little better and feel better,
Keep going into it.
do I not look flat? Am I performing better? Do I feel better?
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why today randomly became a refeed. Not randomly. It's because I sent pictures to Berto and he was like, I still think you look too flat. And that was good feedback, because I was kind of like, that's okay. I'm not as lean as I want to be. I'm 7 weeks out. So I had a little bit of fear behind that. And he's kind of going, yeah, a lot happens in 7 weeks. You don't need to be flat 7 weeks out, after a refeed. Maybe we'll do that if you're a little behind 3 weeks out, and we'll just push the refeeds back or skip them, and we'll sacrifice some fullness. But we don't need to do that for 2 months, bro. You might get on stage a little smaller. So that's the kind of thing where it's still useful to have someone looking over things. But exactly right. If I'm dropping too fast, another outcome, right? Or if I'm looking lean but really flat and dropping too fast, then I'm going to eat more,
Yeah.
So I put another piece of fruit in my shake in the morning.
Yeah.
I think it's
I like that.
I think especially with Brandon with his clients, so they're not at that
Most aren't.
level of experience to warrant that. Like we were talking multi-seasonal competitors here.
Absolutely.
As well. So it definitely tends to then consume you. Like I know a few people that he's worked with, and they may have competed 5-6 years ago, but the 2-3 years in between haven't been exactly like structured good years where they've been listening to their in developing their internal cues either.
Yeah, and I think that if I was to wrap it up and say like this is what I would recommend, the goal it's not to say I'm doing it wrong, I should have already been doing this. It's to say I want to work towards being a competitor who can do that, because that's going to help you transition back to your regular life, and that's also the purpose of the recovery diet. And I think getting towards a more qualitatively informed, internally cued, aware competitor, and then also using the recovery diet has done a lot for us to see our competitors stay healthier and be able to stick with the sport long term.
Yeah, sweet. And we've got we're going to organise a visual of a similar periodised visual guide like what you drew at AUT that time.
Awesome.
So that way people can sort of see how these qualitative and quantitative measures and variables that we want to be tracking, sort of what that relationship looks like.
Beautiful.
So we'll overlay that with this. One thing I wanted to touch on before we quickly wrap up was you wrote this really cool blog article. Is it a blog article?
Yeah, it's a blog.
About, I guess, how would you sum it up? I'm just going to hand it over to you, and then just in case people haven't seen it, if you could just give a quick sort of overview.
Yeah, it came from a place of trying to help young people entering a crowded space, trying to get into coaching, wanting to help people and do what they love, but feeling pressure and time pressure specifically. I have to post every day. I got to get followers now. Everyone is already popular. I have to not only have, basically I got to have a PhD, a pro card, and successful competitors tomorrow. And if I don't, then I need to start echoing people who do and stealing content. And that's kind of taking it to the extreme. And I basically wrote, hey, even if that worked, which it doesn't, to be clear,
At all.
yeah, unfortunately, if you did succeed, you wouldn't want it because you wouldn't be ready for it.
Yeah.
Like the lotto winners, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great parallel. It's you haven't yet built the expertise to have the platform, and you can do more harm than good if you do get there early. And the things you can do to fast track it aren't actually a real opportunity. It's not where you really want to go. If you look at a lot of the people who get there just because they happen to they chose their parents right, and they look great, they got a low set point, maybe they're running a little something on the side, they look amazing. But that limits them what they can become. They get early success, and one day they look up and they're essentially just living off of being an influencer and getting new sponsorships and saying yes to things and creating these micro betrayals of their brand. It's all fitness related, but man, you were pushing a different supplement company 2 years ago, and then you hit about 30 or so, and okay, I guess I'll do business coaching now. And eventually you look up and you don't have quality followers. And so, I've helped to sell mass and got a subscription base for selling the translation of science. We've done the second edition of my books, and I've had the fortune of kind of engaging with a lot of people to help be an affiliate and sell these things. And I've gotten insight into the differences between having a quantity of followers and a high quality level of engagement. And there are stark differences. Sometimes people who have a ton of followers don't do very well when they actually say, hey, and here's something I trust, I believe in, here's a program, and I want you to buy it. It's because their followers are not necessarily following them for any more reason than, I just want to be inspired by your physique, but you don't know what you're talking about,
Yeah.
So, or I don't trust you anymore.
Yeah, you're going to be a big head about yourself when you got that last one following.
Yeah, with my
303.
I am.
I wasn't going to say anything, but
Alex the influencer now.
I have 300 followers. For me personally, 303. For me personally, right? Like I think like the concept of being an influencer. I'm not motivated from external gratification in that capacity. So for me, it's more like I'm internally motivated, and then there'll be other things in which that will drive me. But the thought of being an influencer and having to put all of that aspect of my personal life out there in order to have some semblance of success, financial, whatever it is, to me is very unappealing. Like anonymity and privacy are important values in my life, from those aspects. And I know that for yourself, for instance, like your work is very much just specifically in that stuff, and that's how you contribute, which is, I guess, a similar parallel. But a lot of people, when they come into the industry now, it blows my mind. And Kyle and I were talking about this. Like they're straight onto social, and they think they have to spend $2,000 a month on ads and all this kind of stuff, and they haven't even learnt to converse with people. Your first, how long was your first few years as a personal trainer?
I was a personal trainer from 2005 until 2011 before I became full-time with 3DMJ.
And how long did it take you to become good at talking with people and getting them to buy in?
I would say sometime around 2010, 2011.
Yeah.
So 5 years of personal training experience.
I feel as though people need to be prepared to not even worry about looking at social media until they're at least 2 to 3 years in.
I think there's nothing wrong with engaging with it, but you just have to be honest with where you're at.
Yeah.
Or at least prioritizing it.
Yeah. Well, I think it's just, you just have to be honest. You're not an expert yet, and that's okay. You still have value to add. You've been lifting for 2 years, and you just did a certification, and you're in your second year of school. You're a hell of a lot more of an expert than someone who's just entered the gym for the first day. So, be realistic with where you're at. Don't try to be something you're not. Don't speak past your confidence. And know the value you have to add now, but also work towards having a value that can reach larger. And know that if you did get fast-tracked, if you got quote-unquote discovered, you would just blow it, and you wouldn't even realize it. You'd have some of the smart folks sitting there and looking at you and knowing you're not the real deal.
Yeah.
And that is a fleeting level of exposure that will not turn into a long-term career. Like most people know me from blowing up when I got on Matt Ogus's channel, and I'm very thankful I got on Matt Ogus's channel at the point where I could help him, and he did very well, and I had my master's degree at that point. I wasn't, not that you need a master's degree to be qualified or to speak on this, but if it had happened, say 3 years earlier, when I was kind of just feeling the imposter syndrome and mostly pushing the fact that, hey, I got a good physique, it wouldn't have gone well. It really wouldn't have. I didn't know what I was doing.